So I started off with some pseudocode right here. We have our void setup, we have our void loop, and in the loop, first thing I do is I say we're going to check if the button's pressed and then save it to memory. We'll save either a 1 or a 0 depending on if the button is pressed or not pressed. Then we're going to move down here. If the button is pressed, we're going to turn on an LED, we're going to wait, we're going to turn off an LED, and we're going to wait. So we're going to blink that LED. Otherwise, we're just going to turn off the LED, or we're just going to keep that LED off. So I went ahead and I put actual code in. So there was nothing in our void setup, so there's no code there. This line here is our first line of pseudocode. I could have kept those comments in, and then they would have, the pseudocode in, and those would become our comments. So we make a variable. It can hold 1s and 0s. That's what the bool does. And we do a digital read of pin 2. Let's say that's where our button's at. This saves whatever the button, whatever's plugged into pin 2, whatever our button's doing, into state. Then I come into our if statement and I write the word if, and inside of the parentheses I have a condition. It checks something. It says look in memory at the variable state and compare it to the number 1. These double equals are a comparison thing. And what happens is it compares those two things. It compares what's saved in state and it compares 1. And if those are the same thing, then this condition is true. And if this condition is true, we come into the scope of our if statement. The scope of our if statement is just like the scope of our void loop or our void setup. It's dictated by curly brackets. They begin here and end here. And I can put whatever code I want in here. It doesn't matter what I do. It just won't run unless this condition's true. And if it is true, then it will run. So in this case, we turn on pin 13, we wait, we turn off pin 13, we wait. We've ran those 4 lines of code. We can now leave our if statement. Outside of the scope of our if statement, I have digital write 13 low. What that does is that just makes sure that if I don't get in to this if statement, that our LED stays off. And that's it. That is a very simple if statement. It just checks to see what's happening. It checks every single time through the loop. If it's true, it runs. If it's false, it gets skipped. It's a way for you to write code that will not always run. It depends on what the user decides to do. This flowchart just has the basic code that we wrote. It has, we're reading the button. We have an if statement. If it's true, we turn on, wait, turn off, wait. Otherwise, we do this. And so let's go ahead and take a look just at the flowchart. We read our button and we go straight down. Code always goes from top to the bottom. So we read our button. Once we're done reading our button, we come down to here and it checks something. Is state 1? If it is, we follow this true arrow and we run through these lines of code. Once we're done doing these lines of code, we jump out of our if statement, we run this line of code, and we'll come back up to the top because we're in the loop, and we just keep doing this over and over. But what happens if I'm not pressing the button? Well, then we read the button, it checks the condition, and if it's false, then we just skip that scope and we go ahead and just make sure that LED's off. You'll see that as we go through, it highlights over here what's happening as I hover. So we read, we check the condition, but if it's false, we skip those 4 lines of code and we go straight to making sure it's off. If the button's pressed, it works through them all. So that's the quick overview of the if statement. There's other videos that I have on if statements. We'll cover it in class. There's plenty of reading to do, but that is the quick overview of what an if statement is.